Hello, so I figured I wanted to film some more like book related content because I've been trying to read a lot more lately. With exams, I've not been able to read like at all. My exams ended about halfway through this month, so I have read quite a few books considering I've only had about 2 weeks. I read six and a half. I tend to read about three books at a time, so there is still some half finished that I started this month. I'm just gonna go through them. I keep meaning to post my more of my ramblings. I have a whole like script for one about friendship breakups, which I'm excited to actually talk about. But I wanted to do a little bit more research because I feel like for that one I do need a bit of psychology to like know what's going on in reality rather than just making it up, which I feel like I can do pretty confidently for my other videos. So I am going to be posting some more ramblings, but for right now, I want to talk about books because it's something I'm passionate about and I enjoy reading. And hopefully, you enjoy hearing me talk about what I've been reading. I'm just going to sort of go through them. Okay, so the first book I read this month is The Lamb by Lucy Rose, and I ended up giving this book a 7 out of 10. Hello, I'm realizing as I was editing this that I keep not saying the plot of the books. So I start to do it later after I noticed internally that I wasn't doing it. But so basically, The Lamb is a book about a mother and daughter who live in a house and they collect strays, who are basically people who get lost in the woods and then they eat them. That's all you need to know for what I'm going to say. But I just realized I didn't give some very important context for what the actual book is about before I started talking about what I thought about it. I am really into books about cannibalism, and so when I saw this book advertised as a book about cannibalism, I was like, I immediately must purchase. I mean, if you're interested in recommendations on books about cannibalism, I actually think I'm going to make a whole video about that. But off the top of my head, A Certain Hunger is my favourite book about cannibalism. It's very, very good. But yeah, so I picked up this book thinking it would be a bit like A Certain Hunger or maybe like Tender is the Flesh, more horror, gore. And I think I was a little bit disappointed that it's not really very horrific. It's certainly disturbing, like, don't get me wrong, but it was more psychologically disturbing than actually grotesque, which I think for a lot of people is probably a big appeal. But for me, I thought it was a horror book going in. It was advertised to me a lot as horror. And so when I actually read it, I thought, oh, this doesn't really read like horror to me. On top of this, I didn't really love the way it was written. I thought it was very easy to read. It was very pleasant to read. It was, it wasn't difficult. I didn't have to take breaks. I felt like I could just sort of read for as long as I wanted to and then pause and I'd have taken it all in. But at points, I did feel like it was a bit blunt when it would have maybe benefited in my eyes from some more flowery language or more description. But that obviously is just my preference for the type of books I like to read. So that's not really the fault of the author because I didn't know what I was getting going into it. I think where this book fell flat for me overall is just that I didn't really connect with it as what I thought it was going to be. And that is not the fault of the author. It is probably the fault of the TikTokers who advertised it or who were like selling it to me. And I was very easily influenced. And I'm glad I read it because, again, a 7 out of 10, that's a really good, that's a good book. But this is all of a spoiler, so you can skip 20 seconds or whatever. But I was not really that affected by the relationship between the mother and Eden. I thought that it was sort of interesting, but it didn't really go into it enough for me. I didn't feel that like I really understood it, especially when it sort of gets revealed who Eden is and why she's there. I felt like, why are we not exploring this a little bit more? It's very vague, and I know it's written from the perspective of a child, but I just wish that we sort of got to see more of her and get to find out more about her. And because she's quite a scary character, but she doesn't come across that scary when she's so ominous, so you don't know that much about her backstory. The character I like the most in this book is the bus driver. I didn't really, the protagonist was okay, like, she was a child, so I felt bad for her because she was very, like, unloved and neglected, but the bus driver was the only character that I constantly felt like, this guy has some common sense and he's kind. I did see a lot of people on TikTok crying over the ending. I'm not going to say what the ending is because I don't like spoilers, and I do think that if you're into sort of disturbing fiction, you should go read this book. But I'm not going to say what the ending is. It didn't make me cry. It didn't really affect me at all. I didn't think that it was that interesting. I don't know. I don't want to just say the negatives of this book because I did enjoy it, but it's just what springs to mind is like the things that I would have changed. But I do think like credit where credit is due. It's a good story. It's well written. It's well written. It is really interesting. It's a slightly different take on cannibalism to many authors. A lot of them tend to do it as desire or lust or even love. I don't feel like there was any real love in this book between any of the characters, except maybe for by the protagonist towards Abby, a girl in her class, which I thought was the most interesting relationship in the whole book, and we didn't get to see that much of it, but when it was there, it was very interesting, and you sort of got to see more of the psyche of the main character. But there isn't really any real love between the other characters. It sort of feels like an allyship. Yeah, I feel like I've rambled a bit about this book. I'll probably end up cutting all of it out, but that's The Lamb by Lucy Rose, and I gave that a 7 out of 10. Or if I'm rating things on Goodreads, I round them up, so a 4 out of 5 stars, basically. Okay, now this next book was my only 10 out of 10 of the month, and I did start on a bit of a high note with this book. I read this like the third day after my exams were over, and I was like, nothing is going to live up to this book this month because it was just so amazing. And that is Open Water. So this book basically tells the story between two young people who meet in a pub in southeast London, and they have a lot in common. They sort of get intertwined, and the woman has a boyfriend, but it's complicated, and they end up in a relationship, and it's very, very beautiful, and it's sort of exploring how the relationship becomes damaged by his fear of being a black man in London, and the struggles that come with him, like maintaining his masculinity as well as keeping himself protected, and also the vulnerability of violence that he sees towards other people of color. And it is a very, very, very impactful book. I loved this book. It was so amazing. The fact it was written in second person was really strange to me. I don't know if I've ever read a book written in the second person, except for like epistolary novels. But this book is so interesting and so beautiful, and I just really loved it. I ate it up. I think I finished it in 2 sittings, which is quite short for me. I tend to like to spread a book out across a week, but I found this book so captivating and so amazing. And when I'm finished with the book, I like to go and read reviews of it on Goodreads, because I think, what did other people think of this? And then before I write my review, I'm sort of like reflecting on all the different opinions that I've seen about it. With this book, I saw a review that was like, this language is too dramatic and it's trying too hard. And I literally could not disagree more. I thought this book was so beautiful. It reminded me, in a way, in just the terms of how beautiful the writing was, of Ocean Vuong's On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous. Just because every other line, there's a quote that just makes you go like, oh, like it's so beautiful. And I really actually cried reading this book, which never happens to me. I cried on the train reading this book, which is slightly embarrassing to cry in public. I think also on top of that, the place that it is set, I believe it's set in southeast London, is around where I was born, and an area that I'm like quite familiar with. I can picture quite well, so I do think that helped me connect to the book, because I really recognised sort of where he was describing and everything that was going on. But I really did connect with this book, and it was my favorite book that I've read this month. And honestly, probably one of my favorite books I've read in the last couple of years. It was very, very good. Now, on a much less positive note, I read a book that I've been wanting to read for so long, and I was very disappointed. I gave it a 5 out of 10, which is very low for me. I don't ever give books lower than like a 6 out of 10. And that is Bridget Jones' Diary. I am really sad that I didn't like this book, because I love the film, I love Hugh Grant and Colin Firth, and I really thought that this book was going to be a really easy, light-hearted read. After reading 2 books that were a bit deeper and a bit harder to digest, I thought, I'm just going to buy a book that is really like light-hearted and funny, and that I'm going to love. And it was funny, but I did not love it at all. Everyone I have told that is like over the age of 30 that I didn't like this book is like, what is wrong with you? How do you not like this book? My mum says it's probably because I've already watched the film, but I just think that it was boring. I found like, obviously the story is good, because I knew the story because I'd watched the film, but I just found it irritating, to be honest. It's like it would get into this flow where it was really funny and really good, and like, you were really interested in her friends and her relationships and everything that was going on, and then suddenly you'd be reading 20 pages about her counting calories and how fat she was every other page. And I didn't find this offensive, I just found it boring. I just didn't really care. I didn't care about the amount of calories she'd consumed or all of this. And because the diaries are formatted with like her weight, like how many calories she'd consumed, how many units of alcohol she consumed, and how many cigarettes she'd smoked. I think that's a really interesting idea, and I think it worked well at some points, but a lot of the time I just found myself thinking, oh my god, can this girl please shut up? And every time I kept thinking, oh, she's talking about her unhealthy obsession with her weight, and like there's going to be some reflection or at least some acknowledgement of it. There was nothing. It was just constant the whole way through. And I mean, maybe it's also that it's not that relatable to me as a 18-year-old. She is in her mid-30s, I think, in the book. So maybe it's that I don't find the main character relatable, but I can read lots of books where I don't find the main character relatable, and I'm normally fine with them. So I do think it was just a this book issue, to be honest. I also found that why this book works better as a film in my eyes is that when she's describing her friends, it is very hard to sort of write that in a diary format and actually give you a good image of what these friends are like. Because if you're reading someone's diary, they wouldn't say, this is my friend Stacey and she is 30 and she lives in this house and this is what she looks like, because in your own diary you know that. So either it would read like an unnatural diary, or you don't get to find out information about the characters that I feel like you want to know in order to sort of be able to picture what's going on. So in the film, obviously you meet her friends and you meet the characters and you sort of get to see their personality, whereas in this, because she's describing their personality and she doesn't really give that much background to them, I found it really hard to connect with the side characters. So yeah, I was disappointed by Bridget Jones' Diary, which is a shame because I really, again, do love the film franchise. I was also surprised to see that she mentions both Hugh Grant and Colin Firth in the book. I was like, that is kind of crazy. But I do think I would always say to people with this book, just watch the film. It's a bit like Dead Poet Society. I know that a lot of people like that book, the novelization. I did not at all. I found it so boring, and I thought the film was so much better. And I'm not really afraid to like admit when I think a film is better than a book, even if the book came before the film, because it's okay. Like, the book inspired a great thing, and I appreciate it for that. And it is funny, but it's just not for me. So, unfortunately, I only gave that a 5 out of 10. So the next book I read was much better and I got much more out of it and I loved it very, very, very much. And that was The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. You can tell that I liked this book because as I went through it, I sort of went through and folded pages where I found valuable quotes and then I underlined them in the book. I only really do that if I find a book is really giving me things to reflect on and I really want to write things down that I'm going to then talk about in the review. So this book has a lot of folded pages, a lot of little underlined passages, because it's a very, very touching exploration of grief. If you don't know, The Year of Magical Thinking is about Joan Didion's year after her husband unfortunately passed away and her daughter was very ill and in hospital. And it is devastating, like, it's tragic. And it makes you very, very upset for Didion. But at the same time, for me, I found it really vindicating almost, or cathartic, to read about someone going through grief and thinking all these things that every one of us thinks. And what really touched me in this book, my main takeaway and the passage that I really liked the most, was at one point she's talking about how she needs to sell her husband's clothes, she needs to donate them, and she can't get rid of his shoes. She just can't make herself do it, and she says he's going to need his shoes when he comes back. Oh my god, when I tell you I burst into tears, it was so sad. And she comes back to this idea a lot that she kept thinking he's going to return and he's going to come back and I need to keep this stuff. And she was filling out an organ donation thing and it asked if he would give his eyes. And she was like, he's going to need his eyes. And I don't want someone else to have his eyes. Like, and she sort of reflects a lot on the fact that this is mania and it's illogical and it is not, oftentimes it is selfish, but grief is all of those things and it is terrible, and she reflects on it so beautifully. And I think that anyone I know that I think struggles with grief or with death or the topic should read this book, even though it will strike a nerve and it is going to hurt to read because it's very sad. It really helped me, and by the end I really felt like I'd sort of grown with Joan Didion, and I felt like she'd sort of taken me on this journey through her grieving process. Obviously 1 year is not long enough to fully grieve somebody, especially considering that the year after this was published her daughter then passed away, but I do think that it's a very good place to start with her as well, because this is the first full novel of Joan Didion's that I've read, and so I'm now very desperate to read more of her because I've obviously heard so much about Joan Didion and I've watched many interviews with her, but I've never actually just sat and read one of her books, and I'm very, very glad that I finally have now. Okay, my next book was another 7 out of 10, and it was another book that I would say is kind of about cannibalism. I mean, it's about vampires. Vampires are cannibalist adjacent to me, and I was very, very excited to find this book in Waterstones in my local town centre, signed. It is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. I was very happy to see a signed copy because I've been wanting this book for ages, and I thought it was reduced and signed, and I was like, well, this is a sign that I need to read this book right now because I was going to wait for the paperback to come out. Hungerstone has been recommended to me a lot as someone who sort of likes gothic fiction, sapphic fiction, and then also cannibalism and vampires and that type of thing. Like, I love Twilight, my favorite film ever, and so I think I did go into this book with very high expectations, and it kind of did fulfill them. I think that this book was exactly what I expected it to be. It's a retelling of Carmilla, which, if you haven't read, is a sapphic vampire book, and it predates Dracula. I think it is after John Polidori's The Vampire, so it does kind of annoy me when people are like, this is the first ever vampire book. I'm like, no, it's not. But yeah, it's sort of seen as it's very seminal gothic text. And this is a retelling of this, and it is very, very interesting. Again, I didn't think it was that crazy. A lot of people were in the reviews saying this is the craziest book ever. Like, I did not expect anything that was going to happen in this book. And I was like, have we read gothic fiction before, guys? Like, it is very gothic, and that is good. That's a good thing. It's okay. Like, it doesn't have to be completely original because obviously it's a retelling of an already existing book as well, so it's not going to be completely original. For the first 50 pages, I felt like it was going really slowly, which normally I don't mind, but I was a bit like, for the style of writing, I was expecting it to sort of just go into it because it's very like contemporary fiction. But it took a long time to sort of establish the characters and to establish the world, and I was getting a bit bored by page 50, but then when it reached that point and we sort of got introduced to Carmilla and all of the actual events that had happened in the book, I felt like, okay, I'm really into it now. I read it in around 24 hours, I think, and I really enjoyed it. I was quite gripped by it. The only reason it didn't get higher for me was just because of the writing style. I think like I don't really vibe with the writing style that much, but I thought the story was good and I did enjoy it. And I really appreciate that Kat Dunn is so committed to historical accuracies. The end of the book even has a whole like chapter dedicated to noting the things about the history that she talks about and how she researched for the book, which I think is really important. And I really, really did appreciate reading that. I thought it was very interesting to hear. And you can tell when you're reading the book that she does know what she's talking about. Also, she aimed to make an unlikable male character for the husband, and she succeeded. I hated him the whole time, and I also hated Cora the whole book. They were both so irritating, and I just couldn't deal with them, and it just made me want to skip every single time they were on the page, to be honest, which I think was kind of her goal based on what happens in the book. But I find them very, very infuriating. One little problem that I had with this book and the writing style was that at some points, the sort of need to get a quote or a snippet felt very forced to me. Like, there were many chapters where it would be a whole long paragraph and then it could have ended, but then just randomly there'd be one line that was just like a one-liner that I felt like was completely unnecessary, except for to maybe get a tagline for the front of the book type of thing, which I didn't really love. Like, I felt like it just sort of pulled me out of it. It didn't really, like, to me, these one-line quotes don't really help me get into a book, so I just found them a bit annoying at times. I understand it though, because I think a lot of the lines were good. I just didn't really like how they were just sort of slotted in there. But yeah, I wrote in my Goodreads review something that I think is the most true about this book, which was that depending on who I was talking to, if I was talking to a fan of classic Gothic literature such as Carmilla or Dracula or Frankenstein or Wuthering Heights, I probably wouldn't recommend this book. I probably wouldn't tell them you need to go read this book. But if I was talking to someone who liked neo-Victorian romances or neo-Victorian Gothic, I would say buy this book immediately because you will love it and it will become your new favourite book. I am more of the former than the latter, which is probably why I didn't want to give this book like a 10 out of 10 and be like, this is the best book I've ever read. But I can understand why someone who's really into neo-Victorian literature, especially like contemporary literature, would be into this book because it is good. Finally, we are moving on to a book that I rated an 8 out of 10, which I have been meaning to read for so long. It's one of those books that just sort of sits on your bedside table and you think, I'm going to read this next time I need to read a book. But then you end up buying 5 new books and then you have to read all of them before you get around to this one. Finally, I got sick of waiting and I was like, I'm going to read this book even though I don't know if I'm going to like it, because to be honest, when I read the description, I was like, this does not sound like my type of thing, but I ended up really, really enjoying it. I read like 150 pages of it in the car to a Lana Del Rey concert as well, so an added bonus. And that is High Fidelity by Nick Hornby. I don't know what it is about books written in the mid-90s, the sort of prose that they use, the language they use, and the way they write, but it always hits so hard for me. This sort of 90s writing style to me is always on top. Like, I love it. And a lot of people, when I say that, are like, what does that even mean? But to me, when I'm reading like Hungerstone, I could tell you immediately that book is written in the 2020s or the 2010s. And if I'm reading High Fidelity or The Secret History or Less Than Zero, I could tell you, oh yeah, those books were written in the 80s and the 90s. I did find the main character unlikable, but I still was rooting for him. And I did like him in a way, like in a weird way, because he reminded me so much of just like every man I ever know who's like a British man over the age of 25. I was like, that is just him. Like, I really understand why so many men I know that are like older men like this book, because it is very like, I can really see them in it. So I imagine they probably see themselves in it quite a bit. He is very infuriating about the way he speaks about women and like how he treats women. Not because I think he's misogynistic, but just because he's absolutely a loser. I did actually really enjoy it and find it really entertaining. And a lot of people on Goodreads said that they didn't like the sort of constant listing and they found it a bit trite, but I loved it. I thought it was really satisfying to read. And the way the book opened, I thought was very, very intriguing, with like the top 5 most memorable breakups, and then he sort of goes through all of them. I thought that was really cool and interesting, especially because he sort of comes back to it later in the book, and I really enjoyed it. Also, there's so many great music references in this book that I was like, oh my god, I didn't even know that people knew this song existed. Just about random songs that I remember from my childhood, like Leader of the Pack by the Shangri-Las. I was like, no one has ever heard of that song, and then it's just mentioned in this book really catching me. I'm like, oh my god, it's so cool. So I did really like the music references in this book. My dad warned me that I wasn't going to understand all of them, and I didn't. I understood probably like half to 2/3. But if I didn't understand one, I just Googled it and then listened to the song. And then actually I ended up finding quite a few songs that I quite liked that I'd never heard before from this book. So there's an added bonus, I suppose. And then finally, something else I really liked about this book was that I loved the side characters. I often find side characters so boring, and I'm like, I don't want to hear about this random man, especially because you've not given him a backstory and he's not interesting. The side characters in this book aren't that interesting, but that's what makes them hilarious, because you can just imagine exactly what they're like, and you know someone who is exactly like these guys, and even though they're the type of people that I would never want to meet in real life or have a conversation in real life, reading about them is very, very entertaining. So I'm all up for it. I do think that calling this book a book about love makes people think it's a romance. It's not a romance, but it is a book about love. It's a book about, to me at least, the sort of compromises and the settling down and the getting with someone who you don't really like just for the sake of having a partner, and the loneliness and how transactional love can be and how boring it can be. So it is a book about love, but it's not a romantic book. It sort of shows that even though love is known by everyone to be messy and infuriating and often pointless, everyone still wants it. And this book is exactly encapsulating that idea. So yeah, those are the books that I've read this month. My favourite was definitely Open Water, and then Bridget Jones' Diary was my least favourite, which is funny since I read them back to back. But it was a very good month for reading for me. Some new books that I like very much. And it's currently the 1st of July, so I'm hoping that I can read at least 10 books this month, because I only started on like the 14th of June. So about halfway through. The plan for future videos should be some more ramblings. I will be in Paris on the weekend, so I might do a little vlog of that. Me and one of my friends are going to the beach next weekend, so hopefully again I could vlog some of that. But yeah, I'm going to keep doing book videos, and I might actually make some videos just about specific books, because I do write quite long book reviews. If you're interested in my actual like long form opinions about a book, my Goodreads is linked in my YouTube like posts. I always link my reviews of books after I finish reading them. They're normally pretty long, but not unbearable to read, I promise. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you have any recommendations for me, let me know. And I am hoping to at least post one other video this week, but otherwise next week I will be posting a vlog. So thank you, goodbye.